We're going to let God take over today. We're going to have some fun. Dr. Atoya, are you ready for today's conversation?
I am ready.
Cool.
I was born ready.
Ty,
there we go.
You ready?
Yo, I'm ready, guys. If
All
you
right.
can't feel
Blow
me,
that
I am
whistle.
ready for this.
Timeout.
Whoa.
Tyler, who are we sitting down and taking a timeout with today?
Good grief. That was a hefty whistle, y'all. Well, hey, man, another episode of Timeout with Leaders, everybody. We have a special guest today. Her name is Dr. Atoya Hodges, currently the CEO at Western Wake Crisis Ministry. And here's another line about her. So she's a CEO, an executive director, a board chair, a speaker, a workshop facilitator, an executive and leadership coach, and a mental health consultant. Holy smokes, Dr. Atoya Hodges. Thanks for being on the show.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
You bet. That was a lot of wind I just belted out there. But my first question to you, Dr. Atoya, if we had a little three-piece band, me, you, and Kevin, we just sold out the Carolina Panthers Stadium arena.
Ooh.
We're walking out there with our instruments. 100,000 people are waiting to see us three get after it. What instrument are you playing, or are you the lead singer?
I'm going to be the lead singer.
What song are we belting out? What's our opening act?
I like Walk This Way.
Okay, we'll get the crowd going with a little Steven Tyler. Got it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And something we're all comfortable with. What song will we catch you singing in the shower that you don't even need to have the teleprompter tell you what words? What is that song, your go-to song to pick up your mood on a Monday?
Good question. What would that be? Well, I swear I'm Beyonce when I'm in the shower. Now, what that really sounds like in real life, I have no idea, But in my mind, I'm Beyonce. But what I say, the song that motivates me the most is Superwoman.
Okay. Well, Dr. Atoya, I wanted to ask you if you had to write a book, which I don't know if you already have, you have a lot of accolades out there, Dr. Atoya, but if you had to write a new book today, how about that? We'll put you on that spot. Okay. What would the title of that book be? And what would that book be about?
A Bat Out of Hell.
Oh, yes. I told you I was ready for this conversation. I think you like some contact. What the hell would Bat Out of Hell be about?
It would definitely be about my journey in life, how I have come from being homeless and living in a home full of addiction and domestic violence to being that person that's planting seeds in the world. And so I feel as though there has been so much that when you think about Bat Out of Hell, people are running real fast to get out of that situation. And I think that is the perfect vision of my life, is that I have been running straight out of hell for a very, very long time to get me to where I am right now.
And I cannot wait to get into that journey and that picture of because I think sometimes when we go through those experiences, it doesn't feel like we're getting the right end of the bargain, I guess. Constantly stacked against us and we can't seem to catch a break. I've heard so many people say that. Before we get there, kind of talking about game shows, family game shows that we grew up watching on TV. If you could be a guest on a game show tomorrow, what show are we picking?
Family Feud.
I knew it. I was saying that in my
I
head.
literally was thinking the same thing. I was like, I think mine would be Family Feud. Absolutely. 100%. All right. So then, and you invited us over for game night. It was just really rainy down in your area. I hope your area has made it through this hurricane that we passed through North Carolina. If anybody doesn't know, that's where Dr. Atoya is. But we had a lot of time, let's say, and it was raining over the next 48 hours. What board game are you making us all play with you?
I'm a Yahtzee girl.
Yahtzee. All right. It's been many years since I've played that game, but anyone can play that game with the right mindset and the right energy in the room. It's a very fun game to play with everybody.
That and phase 10 is our go-to when we have game night.
I mean, what's more fun of a word to say than Yahtzee, though, right?
Right. Uno, maybe, but Yahtzee just seems like it's got more jazz to it, you know.
A little oomph with some Yahtzee,
exactly.
know, Dr. Atoya. Well, heck, I said we dive right into your journey. You know, anybody that tells me that they're going to write a book called Bad Out of Hell is my friend, Dr. Atoya. So, I mean, if you want to just start with, you know, going back to, you feel like you've been living like a bat out of the hell for a very long time. I guess my first question is, do you ever feel that hell still to this day? Did you feel where that came from? And does that just make you whoop so much ass in normal life? I know that's Absolutely. A two-pronged question, but you take the floor.
Yes. So I agree. Yes, it does still feel like sometimes hell shows up, you know. The vision that I have on this book cover is definitely a fireman in a fire truck putting out the fire with a whole bunch of bats and me running out of hell, right? And I think for so long, I lived my life where I was the fireman. I was running from one fire to the next, not understanding how to put up the smoke detector so I would understand before it got to the fire. And growing up the way that I did, you know, like I said, there were times that we were homeless. My mom, you know, was part of domestic violence. We were in and out of shelters. There were times we didn't have food. We were constantly being evicted. You know, we just never had that safety and security. So I never got to learn how to put smoke detectors in. You know, I was a child observing this. And then at 19, my mother passed away. And then I suddenly was thrown into real life with a 12-year-old sister. And so in that process, I really had to learn, you know, how to survive. And so I stayed in survival mode for a very long time. And when you live in survival mode, everything's a fire always. There are no preventative measures because you don't understand how to get preventative measures. You're just trying to live that moment and survive it.
Yeah, how does it feel right now? Like looking back that you don't have to live like that?
I look back and I think there's still a version of me that I'm still trying to convince that we don't have to live like that. You know, that version is so embedded within me. However, when I look back and like when I hear, you know, like you announcing all the things that I'd done for so many years, I couldn't celebrate those things because it was in my mind just what I was doing just to survive. You know, getting all the degrees, that was so I wouldn't end up homeless or not being able to take care of my children or, you know, just doing all of these things. It was just a part of my survival, not realizing that God was giving me all the education and all the things and experiences that I needed to build that foundation to put me in the position I am right now. So I can be that voice for individuals that don't have that voice. I can be the one standing in front of government officials fighting for and being that advocate for people that don't have a voice. Like I can be that representative because I've lived it, I've survived it, and I now know how to use my voice to support them.
I mean, when we think about those experiences, right? You wouldn't wish that on your worst enemy, right? But you're then now standing in the mirror and saying, "Wow, look at who I've become," and I feel that celebration piece, and that's always been something that was one of the Athena principles that I learned that really stuck out to me, and I gave myself a failing grade in, was celebrating self. And I love kind of how you tied it back to when you're in survival mode, you're not really focusing on your own accomplishments because you don't really have time to. It's just the next thing. When do you think that you finally were able to look back on your past with grace, you know, with some compassion? You know, it's not what you would have selected, but when did you start to flip, I guess, your script? Instead of being a victim, instead of saying, woe is me and all this happened to me and look at all that I was able to accomplish on my own, because you realize very quickly it really wasn't on your own, that there was some other powers to be. But when definitively in your story can you go back and say, that's when I started to look at my past more as a blessing than a curse?
When I went to prison. That to, again, living in survival mode. And this is something I've written about, I've spoke about for many, many years, is that when I was living in survival mode, I wasn't paying attention to what was going on around me.
Mm-hmm.
And back then I was working in mental health and I was hired as a consultant, and I wasn't paying attention to what they were doing. I was only focusing on my part of what I was doing in the organization. And then when I started suspecting things, I left. And then 10 years later, the feds showed up, and it was to the point where it's like, okay, you have to, they write a story and they're going to make everything fit their story. And when I was no longer needed as a witness, then I became a liability. So now it's like, well, you have a choice. You can plead guilty, or we're doing all of this. And the day that I was sentenced and the day that I walked away from my family and having to leave them screaming in the background, that was the defining moment, because I knew when I walked through those gates that I wasn't coming out the same person.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an agreement I had with myself, that okay, you get a whole year and a day break from life.
Mm-hmm.
So use this and use it in the best way. But it was, at first I was angry, because I was like, okay, God, why are you doing this to me? Like, how did I go from having a multi-million-dollar business to now sitting in prison for a crime that I didn't commit? So it was just, how did I get here? And then when I lost everything, and I just remember walking outside crying, and I was like, God, how do I deserve this? Like, haven't I been through enough? And at that moment, it was as if God was standing next to me, and he's like, I just freed you. Go back in there. And I want you, and that's where the SWOT analysis, the personal SWOT analysis came back, where I heard him say, you go in there, you write down your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities and threats, and you focus there. You use your strengths and you increase your weaknesses to remove those, but then eliminate these threats. And when I did that, I became a GED teacher. I helped more inmates graduate with their GED than they had in years. I created a business development curriculum, a resume curriculum, a bookkeeping curriculum. So I'm pouring into all of these inmates, giving them that. And then I kind of became the resident therapist, because that's my background. So I was helping people through addictions. I was helping people through the mental components of what they were going through, all at the same time I was healing myself. Yeah. Knowing that you got here because you were living in survival mode. You didn't lift your head up out of the fire to see what was going on around you. You were too busy trying to put out fires, and because you couldn't pay attention, all this stuff was happening around you and put you in this situation.
I love how you said it way back to the beginning of that, is just right. They're writing a story, right? They are. And then all of a sudden, halfway through that story, you started taking ownership of what that story was and what that actually truly meant. And I go back to so many of those unfair moments, right, in life, where it's like, how did I get wrapped into this? And I would blame, I think with any opportunity that you do have the blame, to blame something else other than yourself, and I think then we internalize that, and then that's where I was the unworthiness, or I'm not good enough. I think that's where I started in that cycle, because I was giving other people the pen to my script of my story, and right. I hear you just taking ownership of that very early on, and really looking at it, I think, more with grace, and saying, well, this isn't how I would have done it myself, but who's ultimately leading who. And that's really helped me in my discovery, like we've talked about before, is it's not me. And that's where that ego grew. And that's where words like my pride, pride was always something that I think we all held up as a badge of honor, but it really starts to get us in trouble, because pride is then that growth of ego. And then it is me. But then when times of bad, it's not me, it's somebody else or something else. So I just love how you started talking about that script, because of the story, because everybody's always creating a story. and what goes unsaid, other people are going to fill in. And that's the keys to these communications that I'm sure you now bring into your leadership role, is that over communication really doesn't get people in trouble. What have you learned from your personal experience going through that to help others kind of find that best version of themselves when they get to work alongside you every day? Because you said it best. I was healing them, and they too were, while I was healing myself, and you're probably saying, hey, friend, that's so similar from their story. That's exactly how I felt about it. And that's how they got through it. How have you taken what you learned through that downtime, let's say, to what your rebirth, your reincarnation, let's say, as to how you're approaching leadership today?
Right. I think the biggest part of it is just that seeing it through a lens of grace, and knowing that, before, when I was doing what I was doing, I was so ingrained in survival mode that that's all I could see was, how am I going to survive this situation? And I wasn't thinking about how it's affecting or hurting others, because I could only see it through that lens. Sitting down for a year and then starting to turn back and look at my life, and then hearing the stories of so many people, because I did have that mental health background, I could then turn that and look at it through the lens of compassion and grace and say, okay, this person's acting this way because of why, right? Even as a leader, even with my staff, I have always done that. Like, how do I look at it? Like, show me the lens that you're looking at this through, so we can come to an agreement of how to move forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm that boss that I am, of who I am, and I'm trying to lead you, but that doesn't resonate with you, then let's have that conversation. Let me hear it from your lens. Let me see it from your lens. Because every job I have is always in the mental health or crisis. So we get bombarded with hard stories, but it's like, how do you motivate yourself to show up every day? How do you motivate yourself to see it through their lens of destitute? And how do we not get caught in that lens of destitute? So compassion and grace is the best lens that I can ever offer anybody.
And it's all, yeah. So then that's not attaching itself to you, because that's what negativity, they always say, is like, if you're not aware, consciously aware of it, it can start attaching itself to you. And it seems like you started to take like that. I love how you said survival mode, because you're not thinking about anybody else other than yourself when you're in that survival mode. And how many of us are sitting in our jobs, maybe listening to this exact podcast, saying, man, that survival mode sounds exactly what I'm going through right now. And it seems like you flip from a scarcity mindset, right, to an abundance mindset, and then changed your survival to thriving, like a thriving mindset. And it is those shifts that I heard, just what you shared within your own story and your own journey, that really open up your eyes to allow you to be more present in the now.
Oh, I could too, Dr. Atoya. And how fun is it to meet someone with the same lens that you used to have? That
right.
I don't know why that's so cool, but I walked in some doors one time as well, to it wasn't a prison, but it was a rehab. It was the same kind of like, how the hell did I get here feeling? And I never forget, I picked up a book by a guy named Chuck C. It was called A New Pair of Glasses. And he said when he walked into that AA room, it was the same damn seat that he sat in 20 years ago, but his lens changed. And he also, my favorite quote of that book, I tell myself this every now and then. He said, I'm an old man. I had a ton of problems, many which weren't even real.
Right.
And you brought that SWOT terminology up earlier. And I wanted to ask you, when you see someone you're helping actually write down their threats or fears, what is their reaction, or what do they find out once they see it on paper? Can you elaborate on that? Because I did that after I read that book when I was in my slammer, and they weren't very scary after I got it on a piece of paper,
right?
From especially from what I've already done to myself, comparatively.
Yeah. So a lot of what I see, because any person I work one-on-one with, they have to do that. My staff, they have to do that. I teach this. It is now incorporated in various businesses where they do it with their staff. But what most people realize is that they're their biggest threat. You know, because they're so accustomed, it's everybody else's fault. But then when they're sitting there, they realize, like, I really am the person standing in my way. I am my biggest threat, but I'm also my biggest opportunist, right? But it's just the realization that individuals have when they really dig in and see that. It's just mind blowing. It's just like you can see the light bulb come on.
Yeah,
You're damn right. And I remember my resentment. I don't remember if it was like step 4 or 5. I can't remember to this day. But my sponsor pointed out, he was like, I wrote them all down, and then guess what? I did everything that I didn't like about people. Like I participated heavily in what I didn't like about others. And that was kind of when one of my light bulbs came on, Dr. Atoya. Mm-hmm. I was like, holy smokes, dude. I've done the exact same actions that I don't like in people, you know, and what do they call it? You spot it, you got it is kind of the terminology. It's like, why the heck do you know so much about that?
Right. And that's what I tell all my clients, like, get the people that you admire the most, or you surround yourself with the most, or people that have hurt you. Write the things that you love about them, write the things that you don't like, and then flip that mirror, because that's you.
Mm-hmm. Damn right.
You can only spot it because you do it.
And you know way too much about it. You know, you're a walking genius in that department, is what someone told me one time. And I wanted to ask you, like, you know, a lot of people really stay close to their past, you know, for a reminder. How do you balance or teach balancing, or maybe balance is the wrong word, from being like a prisoner of your past, or that pain body that you used to walk around with? How do you keep it close, or do you keep it close, or do you just say, to hell with it? We're looking out the windshield today. We're going forward.
Well, there's a couple of things. One is I invite people to look at this as this elusive seat at the table that we're always looking for, right? That seat at the table is different versions of you. And each version of you serves a purpose in your life. Depending on which version of you might need to be at the head of the table, don't mean they get to stay at the head of the table. Like, there's a version of me that if I feel threatened, she's coming out, and her name is Gina. She's coming to the front, and she's got on a black outfit, and she's ready to do what we got to do, right? She ain't going to let people take advantage of me, right? I used to fear her and used to not want her around, but now I see her benefits, right? The version of me that grew up at 19 and didn't know how to do, there's a version of her that I need. So instead of me looking back at her mad, I appreciate her for her skills and her ability. And that's a lot of what I do with the memory reconciliation. It's like, take that memory, that traumatic memory or that painful memory. Now, let's go look at it from God's lens of how that has impacted your life. Now let's rewrite the story. Instead of that being so traumatic, let's rewrite it to where you see how it's benefited you for now. So now when I go back and look at that version of me, I'm not mad at her. I'm grateful for her. I appreciate her, because had she not gone through what she went through, I wouldn't be sitting where I'm sitting right now. And that's how I look at my past. I don't look at it in that lens of frustration or rejection or pain. I look at it through the lens of grace and compassion.
Well, and I think so many people like myself I didn't know this, right? Because some of this you're consciously aware of, and I think some of this then bakes into your subconscious. But I was so afraid to give that up because I didn't want to give other things up in my life that I was already doing, you know, and I could justify those behaviors based off of that past that I continually got to blame. And I feel like that's where I wasn't ready to forgive, you know. It was like, this is convenient. This allows me that. This is my scapegoat, you know. This allows me to say I haven't had this and I've worked hard for everything that I had. And I think when you had put it the way of closing that energy cycle, you know, I'm a helper, right? And I heard you say, I taught, I coach, I give, right? I heal, I help. I was almost stuck in that as a way to distract myself from a lot of this own work that I needed to do on my own. And I think a lot of people will tell us that, I was a better coach than a student, I was better at giving people advice because I knew all the things that I was doing wrong. To Tyler's point, some of the things that I was unwilling to do, I was saying, hey, if I could tell somebody else to do it, I know it's what I should be doing, but I'm just unwilling to do that. When did you come to that point though? Right. When you're in survival mode, you kind of are helping and healing people as you go of who you just happens to come across you within that day or within that situation. But when did you start to realize that that was more of a gift that you had been given, and maybe part of your calling as to why you were chosen to Dr. Atoya at the time of birth?
Right. So right before I went to prison, there was a weekend that we were at my cousin's beach house in North Carolina. And as I was hugging her by, like I felt like she was worse off about me going than I was, And so I'm hugging her, and it was this loud voice, the same voice I heard when I was walking outside, that said, "You're a healer." And I'm like, "What?" So I like pushed her back. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "What? I didn't say nothing." And I was like, "Huh." So she keeps hugging on me, and it's said again. And it just freaked me out because I'm like, what is a healer? Like, I didn't know that that's what I really was. And sitting down for a year, that helped. And then coming out, I got married right before I went in. And when I came out, just being around my husband, he's from a different place. He's from Jamaica. So he was telling me this story about how, he used, when he was younger, he would hang around with the old heads, is what they call them. And he was like, and he said, and I was listening, and one day they made a statement about, who do you love the most? Your wife, your children? And the one guy's like, I love me the most, because if I don't love me, then I can't love others. And if I can't be true to me, then I can't be true to others. And he says, and when I heard that, I knew then that I had to love to learn myself. And as I listened to that story, it was just like something inside of me just broke out in tears. And that was, I feel like, another pivotal moment in my life where I was just like, I've never loved me. I've hated myself so much that I've never had an opportunity to love me. So even though I've been helping people all of these years and healing people, it was at the expense of me. And it was killing me. And that was what was keeping me in the survival mode, because I didn't have boundaries. Because if someone called, needed help, I was going to sacrifice everything to go help. But then that was only harming me. So I had to flip that script to be like, no, you first, then others, because my bucket was empty. So I was really not pouring into individuals the way that I needed to pour into. And that's how I lead people now, even in the organizations. I'm going to fill in what makes you be a better employee and leader within yourself, is because you have to learn to love you first. Because if you walk through that door hating you, you're not going to be any good to anybody that we're working with.
And you go from telling to showing, right? And I think that's a big, like, you're not creating that destination for them. You're helping them co-create that destination or that vision for themselves, which I absolutely love. And going back to your pause, right? Because I think taking our foot off the gas, some of us got that through the pandemic. Some of us took that opportunity. I'll never forget Mark Cuban. It was right around the same time, Ty, that you and I had interviewed his brother. And he said that how people choose to take this time during this great pandemic will set them up or make a huge cascading impact.
Yep.
But that was the first time in my life going from that survival mode, right? I started surviving in my career. You jump into that survival mode, but this was the first time that I had a good excuse or reason to not be in that survival mode from a work perspective. Finally having the space, and not feeling guilty or shame that I wasn't working my ass off from 9 to 5, right? And it was all about efficiency and how efficient could I be down to every single minute. Tyler remembers meeting me probably and was like, this guy it's a little psychotic when it comes to work. Like, but that's
Dialed
just,
down by a minute.
yeah, literally down to a minute, which is a crazy way, but it totally took me out of the present. When did you lose, I guess, that feeling like instead of it being a sentence that you have to be in this cell for a year, where you looked at it a little bit differently and said, man, this is a blessing that I don't have all these other distractions. And now this is my time to figure out who and start to love myself, like you said. When was that aha moment? Was it before you went in, or was it within the first couple of weeks? Because again, you probably felt like this element that you were losing that time too.
I think I came to terms with it before I went in. Because the day that I got sentenced, that day, it would be a day that would be forever etched in my head, because I was under the impression I wasn't going anywhere. So then to hear that I was, it was just like, okay. But I already knew there was something resonated in me, because I had kind of pulled back from God and all of that, because there was so much anger, and then there was a part where I tried to kill myself, because I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And in that mix, I knew that, okay. And I think my biological son, because I have two sons, one I adopted, and my biological son said, go rest. Take this time to rest, because you have never rested. And so there was these things that were leading up to that. So I knew walking in there that I was going to make this time effective, because I didn't know how, just like you were saying, I didn't know how to not have a schedule. I didn't know how to not be doing something all the time. I didn't know how to not control everything. And then when you get in there, you realize you have zero control. And even while I was in there, I still thought I could control my businesses and the households and everything. And I learned real quick that you cannot do that. Now, people that sit there and say they run businesses while they're in prison, I don't know how they do that, but that just did not work. And so when I lost everything, I had no choice but to sit down and face me. And then I started rebuilding that relationship with God. And I got baptized while I was in there. And that was when it was the turning point. There was this huge shift. There was a book that I read, The Purpose-Driven Life, I think that's what it's called, by Rick Warren. And that just completely shifted me while I was in there.
Do you think we have to lose everything to know what we have?
I think me answering that is coming from a lens that has lost everything to understand, to appreciate it. So I don't know what that other lens would look like.
Do you think
how
we
you
need to
can
go through
appreciate it.
adversity and pain in order to understand what good times and happiness truly really is?
I think it gives you a gauge. I think it allows you, because you could always be happy, things can always come to you easily. And I've seen that happen for people. And then when something tragic happens, they don't know how to handle it and they can't come out of it. I think that it allows you to appreciate the variations of life.
And I think like feeling bad that you're feeling bad, it's like all of a sudden that like negative emotions all of a sudden are bad emotions. And yeah, I mean, that's something that you've drilled into my head, it's not a bad emotion and you're putting that definition on it,
Right.
But to your point, it's like that blind sense of optimism can really get you into trouble, because then you're fabricating happiness. And every time you're just fabricating, whether it's alcohol, whether it's work, through recognition and reward, right? I was constantly fabricating that happiness in those moments where I couldn't find it. So I loved how you put that.
I heard not too long ago, a fellow said, the worst thing that's happened to you is the worst thing that's happened to you, to put it on a grand scale, you don't really have to, everyone's rock bottom could look a little different, I think, if you're a human being. And I think you're awesome, Dr. Atoya, coming from where you came from. I think you're a little more authentic than, someone trying to do your job that hasn't been where you're from. Right. You definitely, and you're so in line with God. So Kevin talks about you, by the way, all the time, Dr. Atoya, just a heads up. And I wanted to know if you could kind of just break down your daily practices for you to be so in line with God now is what I'm very curious about. Like, how does Dr. Atoya wake up every day? Do you do certain things every day consistently? And I'll pause right there.
Yes. So before my feet even hit the ground, I say the Lord's Prayer, and then I give thanks for everything that I want. Love, joy, harmony, peace. I just thank all for all of that. And then when I get up, I go down, I work out because I invest in me. Then I read the Bible. And on my way to work is when I listen to sermons. Because it's kind of hard to cuss people out when you're sitting in traffic for an hour if you're listening to God, right? So it has definitely helped with my road rage. I can definitely say that. But I need that, and then when I walk through these doors, I already know that God has prepared me for the day, because as I pray, I pray like, give me the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding to lead your people. When I open my mouth, you flow out of it, because you know what people need to hear and how they need to hear it for it to resonate within what work you want to do. Continue to use me to answer people's prayers. I want you to use me in that way. And so when I walk through that door, God's walking with me. He's already opened the door. And so that just shifts my entire perspective and my mood throughout the day. And when I find myself feeling, stressed or anxious, I start right there and say a prayer. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When I'm walking to the bathroom, I'm saying the Lord's Prayer. I'm saying what I need, because if I'm feeling these things, I know that means I'm not in alignment with what it is you want me to do. And then, when I get home, because I work several jobs, board president, I'm the CEO here, and then, I own my business. I help my husband run his business. So, I have a lot going on, but self-care comes first. And then when I do come home, I have my time block where time's cut off. It's all about husband. It's all about marriage. It's all about that investment. And then when I go to bed, I journal, I read, I unwind, and I give all the glory to God as I write my journal.
And this is every day. This is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. And you also talked about control earlier, which I wanted to ask you a question about, Dr. Atoya.
Please. Yeah.
Did it feel so amazing to you when it finally clicked that we're not in control? Like, did that feel amazing one day when it kind of went ding dong?
Yes and no. It was terrifying because I didn't know how to let go of control. Because when you want to talk about OCD, oh God, me and OCD were best friends for a very long time. And so I wanted to control everything in everybody. It had to be done this way or it was not right. And now that I sit back, that stress level is not there. Oh my God, like that freedom is just so amazing. And I've even learned, like even this weekend, my work life, there's some control factors, meaning scheduled, right? The weekend, I don't want to schedule. I want spontaneity. I want to be able to just go and do. If people ask me, well, what's your plans for the weekend? I'm not responding. I'm not planning nothing. I will figure it out when I get there. And I think letting go of control and just trusting has been one of the things that I'm the most proud of, because having to be in control really destroyed my life.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, Dr. Atoya, the first time I heard it wasn't about you. It was the saying, right? I walked out of the meeting and I was like Will Ferrell in Elf. I was like a 10-year-old, 6'2", 250-pound, like 35-year-old going, it's not about me. It like felt so freeing. I was like just telling random people, You know, I was like at Subway, and I was like, you know what? It's not about me. You know, I was just so damn excited. But
Right.
I love
yeah,
how you put that though, Ty, because like that control piece, I would get upset, right, if somebody wasn't living up to the expectation that I put on them, and half the 3/4 of the time or 7/8 of the time, I probably didn't even tell them what I wanted, right?
Right.
They were supposed to know somehow through osmosis, through this is the right way. How could you possibly do it differently or think that you could do it differently? But that control, to your point, is that allowed me to finally be present, and I think giving it to somebody, and that was God, and like without it, you do shoulder a lot of that burden. You do start to insulate and isolate yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you start to turn to other things like Jack, Jim, or any other vice that you want because they aren't telling you what you should be doing. They're not judging you, right? They're seeing you after the fact. It's down the river. And to your point, I think when we're stressed, right, those are the times, and in survival mode, we're stressed quite often. That's where my ego started to form the most, right? That's when isolation started to happen. And it's like, okay, batten down the hatches, know what you know, right? You trust yourself. You've been through this before. You look, all the things that you've gotten through, it's not going to be anybody else that's going to help get you through it, this adversity or this challenge.
Right.
That's really where that isolation and that ego started to grow more and more. And that's where my pride became larger, right? So over time, to Tyler's point, you start to become the person that you never wanted to become because it was the person you were trying to hide from everybody else because you've dubbed it as bad.
Yep. I think the biggest wake up call was once I did free myself from that. I was helping a friend who was identical to me. And I got to see it and I was like, oh my God, this is miserable. Like, no wonder people didn't want to really be around me. I don't want to be around you because this is horrible, but you don't realize it because you feel like there's been so much happen in your life that you didn't have control of, that you had to have control of something. And you took that to the extreme. And I was just like, that weekend, I was texting everybody that had been a part of my life, like, I am so sorry. I don't know how you put up with me. Like, thank you. And I love you. And I'm so sorry that I put you through that, including myself.
And I think there's no worse feeling in life than you're worried not being taken serious, like that's probably the ultimate hell. When your word just has zero weight to a point, and Dr. Atoya, I wanted to ask you, what does living free mean to you and feel like nowadays?
Living free to me is being at peace. That is freedom and fulfillment. And everything I do is based on that. I literally will ask myself questions, and these are even tools that I teach my clients. Like, before I say yes to something or no, I ask myself, what emotion, if I say yes, what is that going to do? Is that going to give me happiness? Or am I saying yes to people please? Or am I saying yes for status? Or if it's not aligned with my peace, then it's a no. And that's how I operate, because I've lived a life where I didn't have that freedom, where I didn't have that peace. And now that I have peace, I can't let nothing disrupt it.
And I bet that helps with like keeping your commitments then,
Absolutely.
when people ask me about like success or how do I live my day, and that's my answer, they're pretty underwhelmed.
Right.
But I think keeping your commitment is harder than a lot of things in life. And that's probably the overcommitting.
Yes.
Half the time just saying, yeah, without checking your own time, your own calendar to see what your family's up to, your wife, your kids, yourself even, and I ran into a lot of yes people, and all of a sudden you show up for a meeting and they're not there, and that's like the old version of us is what I call it. I was like, well, there I was, just saying yes and not even showing up to where I said I'd show up.
Or you would have 9 things booked for the same day. I was the worst for that. And then even now, if it's not on my calendar, I don't know about it. And I hate living by that, but I knew what living on the other side of that looked like. And that's where I was being dishonest to so many people, including myself. And I was like you, like, even though I was a beast in the business world, but when it came to personal things, none of my family or friends would believe if I was going to show up or not.
Yeah.
And I lost a lot of trust within them, and I had to own that. And that was part of what I got to see when I sat down for a year. I call that a very expensive rehab, but it's what I needed. I needed a rehab from life, and then you have no control in there. And I think that taught me that you really ain't in control, because they control when you eat, when you sleep, when you do all this. They took control and I had no control. And I think that helped prepare me for coming out knowing that I didn't have control.
I love how you said your business self took over all other versions of you, and that's, I mean, Tyler talks about his isms, and I'm a workaholic, right? Definitely. But for a lot of those same reasons. So I would never miss anything from a work perspective. I would never overpromise or do anything, because I knew that would be a direct reflection on me. But I would do that so often on my other items that were lower priorities, right? And then I was wondering, I was like, wait a minute, why don't you think I'm going to show up to that? I do that all day. I don't have a problem, and I could not see it from their side. I would never happen on a business side, but it was happening so often on the personal side that it was like, no, I look at all the proof that I have. I don't do that, because I was only taking the thing that was eating into the majority of my pie, which was work, and that's where the ebbs and flows, where I think you see this orchestration of a lot of those interpersonal challenges projected in this grand scope. And here you are, then I was second guessing myself, or riding the wave of highs and lows based off of everybody else's interpersonal problems.
Exactly.
And instead of knowing, and I think that light from within was always missing. I was always waiting on others to light my fire, which was the wrong way, I think, to start anything, to start any movement forward. It was that light needed to start from within, just like that oxygen mask saying that never made any sense to me. And you still hear it, and it's like, oh, well, I'll have time to put on the person behind me, the person next to me, the person in front of me, their mask before I need to put mine on. And do you think that saying no came with like your ability to set those boundaries, the more worthy and the more that you loved yourself? Did that become easier?
Yeah, it did. And then I think, I operate now in life fulfillment. And that's one of the things that I teach and instill in my clients is we have these 6 buckets of life fulfillment. And I now understand that in order to have fulfillment, I need to be making deposits in each of those buckets. And I set my calendar based on that, in those 6 principles. And if my work and career are starting to get too many deposits, then I know that I'm going to be unequal. And when that happens, these are some of those things that I talk about, like putting the smoke detectors in. I have my calendar color coordinated by all 6 things. And if one is starting to get real heavy, then I'm like, okay, so now is a no. I don't have the capacity in that bucket to do this, And like this month was a very busy month because I had 4 huge fundraisers between the 2 nonprofits that I had to do, right? But I knew this month was going to be busy. So October, it's already where I started reducing some of that because I've already put in a lot of that. And I think when you operate your life and then when you lead from life fulfillment, that does run into the culture and the atmosphere of the staff, because that's what I'm operating at. And I'm teaching that, like, here's the 6 buckets you have to have in order to have life fulfillment. Where are you not making deposits? Then we need to focus on that bucket.
And you're modeling and teaching them through your action and behavior, because like the other piece, right? If you have that ego, it's you're allowed to do it, but nobody else is, I'm paying for 8 hours. So But you've now seen probably the benefits of them being more balanced in all six of those buckets to how they perform or how they interact with the client or how they interact with the individual needing those services, that you're then
Yep.
not seeing that negative event attached to that individual, and now they're owning it as their own. I just love
Absolutely.
how you said too, is like I'm such a slave to my schedule and calendar. And I think that's a majority of people right now. The more that the fridge calendars became digital and now we can access them at all times and any time, but booking these appointments with yourself, I think, is really something that it won't happen. And you know, it won't happen unless you are booking that time on the calendar and blocking it out. So that's one of the things that I'm definitely taking from today's conversation. It's enough to talk about it, but actually scheduling it as an appointment with yourself, you're adding and associating the same value that you have in some of the other areas from a professional standpoint.
So what do you think that tells you, your mind, your psyche, that version of you that you've ignored? It's like, no, I'm putting you on my calendar because you are important.
Yeah.
That's my investment time into you. So then that does strengthen your worthiness. That does strengthen, I'm choosing you. I'm protecting you. You come first to me. That's putting that action into place.
Well, because the rest of the world's telling you that it's not, right?
Right.
I think that you can delay that, right? And that, hey, you can't do that today, but you can maybe do it tomorrow, right? And then some of how I bought into that mad science, and it's like, yeah, I was pouring from an empty cup, and that's where like burnout. It was like all of a sudden I was like, what's burnout? What is quiet quitting? I don't even know what these terms are. I don't even, that's never even registered. But you can push yourself to a certain limit where if you're not recharging those buckets, like you've realized how much of life you've actually missed. And that's the part where I love that you said it starts with forgiving yourself sometimes. And some of the greatest threats that your question literally was the same question I was going to have. How many times did you see those threats are actually fictitious? They're just as fictitious of what you believe the future is going to bring you. That there's really not a lot of meat behind it or evidence that that's a true threat. It's just a belief.
I just wanted to kind of touch on the word of overthinking stuff. I think that was one thing that was a very common trait me and my fellow buddies had that I was in church basements with in these meetings. And do you ever find yourself? How do you work on yourself to not overthink? Because I think that to me, if I'm filling up my calendar, there's two sides to me. I'm either filling my calendar up or I'm just doing things now. On a Monday morning, I'm just getting that action momentum going. And all of a sudden, I don't even have a calendar because I'm doing everything now. I think there's two ways to it that I've experienced. I guess, Dr. Atoya, with your clients, do you deal with a lot of overthinkers, people that really just slice this thing any way?
The world is overthinker.
Rather than just firing away, being present, and I also wanted to comment, if I'm present, I'm pretty darn busy in a good way.
Right.
If I'm here, if I'm just nonchalantly filling my calendar up like we're talking about, and I do like to do that to be a little organized, but sometimes I'm like, I could probably knock that thing out in like 11 minutes right now, but I just wanted to know first, Dr. Atoya, how do you help your clients that love to overthink everything?
So coming from a reformed overthinker.
I knew it, yes.
Part of that came from me just finally feeling confident. Confidence is the key to the overthinking. You overthink because you don't believe or you don't have enough confidence to make a decision and pull the trigger into action. So overthinking is what gets you in that, it's pushing you in that survival mode because you're either freezing or you're just stuck. And so you get caught in this loop of all of these different things. But the longer you stay in overthinking, the longer it's going to be before you get to the other side. And so I always counteract it when I find myself slipping into that cycle is I get up and walk. I immediately take action because then I get that clarity, right? And And that's one of the things I do teach a lot of my clients is let's set up what works for you for that smoke detector. And that smoke detector for me, you know, if I find myself starting to overthink, I get up, I go walk because there's an action. And that allows me to step away from it. And then when I come back, I have a clear mind. If I don't have a clear mind, then I push it to the side, not to procrastinate, but I give myself like 10, 15 minutes before I pick it back up. And then I say that prayer, please give me the clarity that I need to know the exact steps I need to take. Because if I'm overthinking it, I'm trying to control it. And that's where I'm out of alignment.
I love it. I do the same dang thing on accident, I think, Dr. Atoya. When I'm in that mode, I'll drive to like Starbucks and listen to like pirate music. I'm into pirate music right now. It's like, dun, 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 dun. And all of a sudden, I kid you not, I come up with the best response or idea while I'm listening to like me sailing across the Caribbean in like a stormy night.
Right.
You know, it just comes out of nowhere. But and then I've been also reading a lot about the subconscious, you know, that is that thing is always churning.
Right.
And just like your walks or a drive or just getting out there and listening to whatever or really focusing on the trees and the birds, it's so strange to me still to this day. And I kid you not, it works like every time. And I still don't do that every time.
Right.
You know? But
yeah. Grounding is important. And that's why I tell people, go outside. Because you get to see the abundance of the world when you step outside. And that just grounds you. And I mean, I'm Native American, so of course we believe that we're one with Earth. So it's just like, go stand outside, ground yourself, go take action, because it's like you said, it's bringing yourself back in alignment. Because when you're overthinking, you're trying to create the solution and control the narrative, and that's not where we're supposed to be.
You're dang right. Yeah, and action was my higher power for like 3 years, just for because it just worked.
Right.
And I thought that it worked, and people were like, "That's the stupidest higher power ever." I'm like, "Whatever, man. I'm Action Jackson over here, just doing things." And when I met Kevin, I was I was on the borderline of being too much of a helper, but as well, Dr. Atoya. I remember like rescuing doctors from crack houses in Rochester and stuff on like a Saturday afternoon. And Kevin was like, "You're doing what?" And I'm like, "Yeah." but I think a little slice of that did help me down the road, you know, being that little helper, like you were talking about when your bucket was turned over. My favorite part of that was I slept so good.
Oh, definitely.
And at that time of my life, normal sleep was like that was the magic number of my day. You know, that was my goal for the day.
But I love how you guys are talking about it. Overthinking was an element of control, because I think overthinking was the element that I needed to be a perfectionist, right? And perfectionism was something that I chased. And when I wasn't hitting being perfect, then I was bad, you know, or not worthy. I wasn't good enough. It was something I hadn't thought of. But I love that.
But perfectionism is a sign of overthinking.
Absolutely. You know, and it's like,
I mean, perfectionism
coulda, woulda, shouldas, you know, and then I will, and I am, like, those weren't really factored in next, you know. It was, you're constantly kind of prisoner of your past while you're still attempting to try to predict and control your future. It's like this quagmire that never really works out. And I loved how you said, like, the things that we procrastinate are the things that we're just not assigning a value to, or we don't really love. We wish we said no to. But we didn't ever establish that boundary. So we kind of just then get into this cycle where you're never really finding a foundation. You're like a duck, you know, you look like you're just gliding, but your feet are moving 1,000,000 miles an hour and nobody else can see it or feel it. And I love how you said the grounding piece, because I think that walk, right? I think it's that element of that you think you're a lot bigger, you know, until you step outside and all of a sudden, wait a minute, I'm an ant on this spinning ball. I'm not that big. It's not that big of an issue. It's not that big of a challenge because I have life and look all the things that are around us. So, man, today's conversation could have been, I think, another 2 hours or 3. But I, luckily enough, get to work with Dr. Atoya. So I get to see her once a week. And clearly it's helped me immensely. But this is why I always encourage people. It's kind of Tyler's joking around of going into basements and things like that. But Tyler and I are two people that are always healing out loud, because I think the second that I
Yeah.
felt like I was alone, that's when I got really scared. And
Yep.
not alone. There's other people that have been through it before, and getting the advice from your mother may not always be what how you're going to receive it, because it's just your mother trying to make sure that you're doing what's in the best interest of you, and they ultimately want what's best. But I had a client tell me today, my mom told me a lot of the same things that you're telling me to do. And it's like, yeah, but it's coming from your mom. So I'm sure that's why you didn't really listen to
Exactly.
So totally
Like,
understand. But I love
woman,
today's
you know what you did
conversation.
to me?
Exactly. 100%.
I trust in you.
Yeah. Get out of here. Yeah.
You
So, but
traumatized me. I can't trust you right now.
exactly. But thank you so much for today, Dr. Atoya and Ty. Thanks,
Thank you.
thanks for all the great questions, because I think we're all on a journey, and I think that's what we all kind of danced around and talked about, is that stuff is not stagnant. You're never done doing this stuff. It's constant. And that naysayer internally, I've named my mark, and I've heard Dr. Atoya. What was your name? Rita. Yeah.
Gina.
Yeah. Naming them really helps,
Yeah.
because that pulls it out of the subconscious, bringing it to light and allowing us to give it to
Mhm.
somebody else. And you and I are both, all three of us are choosing to give it to God. And that's been the easiest thing. I don't have to explain it. I don't need an explanation. I just have this great thing that I get to hand it off to and not worry where it goes after that, and
Right.
trusting the process. So thank you for today's
Absolutely.
conversation. You guys are amazing.
Thank you. I loved it, and I appreciate it, and I love listening to y'all. Like, you're one of my few podcasts that I listen to, right? So I do appreciate you both very much. Yeah.
Thanks for jumping on, Dr. Atoya. Well, I'll see y'all
Absolutely.
later.